And thanks for joining us here on PM Express. Today has been a very busy day across the SAP region, and there's a lot of focus on one country. One country is Niger, but also on the SAP region as a whole. Ghana obviously is part of that SAP region, and that is why we're all concerned, and the world is talking about this. But what is the impact of what is happening in Niger on the SAP region? Is democracy really in crisis, as many have said? Let's start with the very basics. If you're just joining us and you don't know what has happened in Niger, let's break it down for you. And I'll bring in my guests to help us walk through what has been happening in Niger and its implications for you if you live in this region as a whole. First off, we know that as of today, the ECOWAS deadline had passed for the military junta to hand over power back to Mohamed Bazoum, who is the deposed civilian-elected president of Niger. That has elapsed. You remember that when ECOWAS issued that warning, they had said that they've given them about to Sunday, close of day, Sunday, that's 9 p.m. thereabout, for them to hand over power. If they don't, then all options were on the table, including military intervention. The junta has, as we speak tonight, they've shut down the airspace because they anticipated a threat coming in from a foreign power. We also know that the coup generals have also asked for help from the Wagner Group, and that is something that Al Jazeera is reporting, that they have asked for help from the Wagner Group, the Russian mercenary that has been in Ukraine and has found itself in the Sahel region, in Burkina Faso, in Mali, also places where we have military juntas also happening tonight. We understand the U.S. is also saying they support ECOWAS in what they're planning to do. A few very important things. They've closed the airspace, but if you use the Flight Trader 24, you will see that they allowed in a flight from Burkina Faso into Mali, the Malian capital, Niamey. And that is beginning to tell us what I call the junta alliance, the alliance that we're beginning to see between Mali, Burkina Faso, and now Niger. And they are coming together now to form an alliance, warning the rest of ECOWAS, if you step in, you'd attack Niger, you have actually declared war on the rest of us. That obviously is very worrying for a lot of the international watchers of what is happening in that part of the world. Now, we also see that the junta has intelligence, and they've announced that the foreign power was preparing to attack it. They haven't disclosed the nature and on which foreign power it is. But the military chiefs from ECOWAS, including Nigeria, Senegal, Togo, and Ghana, have drawn this detailed plan for the use of force. And thankfully, we can speak to the man at the helm just to give us clarity on where they are tonight. We also know that ECOWAS has acted on this threat before, right? If you break it down and if you look at the facts available, Guinea-Bissau, we sent in troops there to assist. Gambia, also we've done so. If you look at the other areas in Mali, Liberia, over the years, ECOWAS has shown that if it's necessary, they will mobilize and they will have to step in. But this is a map that comes up quite frequently, because now if you look at from 2010 to 2023 alone, the West African SAP region has become very attractive for coup makers. And as a result of that, we've also seen the Sahel region in particular become very attractive for Islamic militants and radicals, Al-Qaeda and ISIS as well. And these are the countries. Niger is what we are talking about now, but not only Niger. We've seen Burkina Faso also explode as a result of the coup. We've seen Guinea, we've seen Guinea-Bissau also coming in. And then we have Mali. And these three here is coming together to form what I call the junta alliance. So that tells you a story. If you look right here, you begin to see Ghana is somewhere here, Burkina Faso is right above us. So us in Ghana, very concerned about what is happening. Nigeria is too, because they have a huge stretch of coast, actually bordering Niger also. And that's why you see Tinubu, who of course shares ECOWAS, also stepping in and saying he will not tolerate this and leading and negotiating with the rest of the SAP region to adopt a very tough stance towards this. So this is a picture that is beginning to emerge very strongly. Guinea-Bissau also there. And then you see that in terms of, also, can ECOWAS really do anything about this realistically? Do they even have the manpower, the resources to do this? Remember, as I said, Tinubu is the chair of the ECOWAS right now, and his country is a superpower on the continent when it comes to the military force and the strength across the SAP region of 135,000 troops Nigeria has. The rest of them, real tiny little forces. So Nigeria is a superpower here. And then you have, coincidentally, a Nigerian president who is chairing ECOWAS at this moment with his own borders threatened because of what we've seen happening in Niger. And so there's a lot happening tonight. That's just a brief. I want to bring in right now my guest, but note always that PM Express is brought to you by Cherry Tree Properties. We develop spaces as though we're going to occupy them ourselves. Syntax tanks is strong, it's tough. Alomobit is also, and as you know, experience greatness in every moment, and the Ghana AIDS Commission. My guest joining me tonight for a conversation is Ambassador Dr. Abdul Fattah Musa. He's a commissioner for political affairs, peace and security in ECOWAS. Dr. Alex Vines is a research director at the Africa program, Chatham House. Also, Oluwole Ojawale is the Regional Organized Crime Observatory Director at the Institute for Security Studies. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time here on PM Express. Ambassador, I want to start with you. We saw that ECOWAS obviously had made a decision to impose this deadline that expired yesterday. We've seen the statement from ECOWAS tonight calling for another extraordinary summit on Thursday. What's the next move now, and what will that summit do? What's on the agenda?
No, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. We've explained severally, that ECOWAS has an array of tools in its arsenal as far as our fight to restore constitutional order in the region goes. So we have to exhaust all these tools in our toolbox. And the first of them, like we said, has been the shuttle diplomacy that has been going on. We have deployed missions there. We have not actually had any joy yet, even as the deadline for the release of President Bazoum and the restoration of constitutional order, were passing. We were still insisting on the mediation angle of it. Tomorrow, I am joining a team from the UN, from ECOWAS, and then from the African Union to go back to Niger, to go and continue with this diplomatic work that we are doing. In the meantime, the chiefs of defense staff met in a 2-day planning meeting to develop a comprehensive, something like an intervention roadmap, for the ECOWAS intervention in Mali. So that also has been concluded. So what is next? And I think that was your question. On Thursday, the heads of state are going to meet, and they are going to be accompanied by their chiefs of defense staff during the ECOWAS summit. So we are going to review the diplomatic efforts that have been deployed up till this point to see where we need to, strengthen our approach. And as I said, we had an array of tools. In the meantime, sanctions have started biting in the country. Sanctions were also imposed on the country. There were cuts in the electricity. Parts of Niger today is in the dark. Prices have shot up overnight, and there is a lot of pressure on the junta, to yield, to do something. So we are using all these tools. And then on Thursday, we are going to review, have these efforts worked so far? If they have not, what next? And what is going to be done will be an analysis that the chiefs of defense staff will give their report about the concept of operation for the military intervention in the country, which has never been off the table. But we have said it is going to be the option of last resort. Okay, so they will give that. The member states will confirm their contribution of elements, whether contingency owned equipment, how many troops, and other things, to try and then finalize that, also, and then also to review all other options, and also to decide on if we are going to intervene militarily, when and where. All those issues are going to be the prerogative of the authority of heads of state and government. And like you said earlier on, the deadline passed, and many people thought, oh, the deadline has passed, so ECOWAS must be, intervening right now. That is not how the military operates, because we have to maintain that strategic, ambiguity, just to keep people guessing as to when, where, and how, if there is going to be a military option, how it is going to be applied. So, in a nutshell, this is what the summit on Thursday is going to talk about. Review our approaches so far and see where we need to tweak them, and also to try to further fine tune or get instructions from the heads of state about fine tuning the military intervention option.
Alex, give me your assessment of everything you've heard, the ECOWAS plan, as we've heard, clarified by the ambassador.
So the ambassador, I think, was very clear on that it's a comprehensive approach by ECOWAS. So that means politics, it means diplomacy, but it also means security planning. And clearly it's a step-by-step process. And also ECOWAS is definitely evaluating the impact of the sanctions that are imposed on Niger. Not only the ECOWAS sanctions, but of course there are Western sanctions also: suspension of aid, suspension of financial assistance to the junta. My view is that the junta is feeling the pressure. Last week it already said that it was now preparing for a short transition process pending elections. So that's still ill-defined. What is the transition? How long will it be? And is it guaranteed that the men in uniforms won't have anything to do with the elections? But these are questions that Ambassador Abdel Fattah Musa, with his colleagues from AU and UN, can explore more in Niamey tomorrow. And then the other thing showing the fear of the junta, in my opinion, is the closure of airspace. It surprised everybody, including international airliners. Flights to the United Kingdom got disrupted and had to fly around Niger. They were delayed into London or into the destinations they're going. So everybody was caught by surprise by that. But that is an indication that the junta in Niamey fears ECOWAS, fears what the summit on Thursday is going to come up with. And that's good. I mean, that is the strategic ambiguity that the ambassador's talking about. This is about planning. My own hope is still that there isn't need of an intervention, that the junta recognize that they need an off-ramp, and that we find some sort of diplomatic solution to this.
Oluwole, are you hopeful that a diplomatic solution is possible, considering that the junta is digging in its heels, they've closed the airspace? Do you hope, or are you hopeful that this will work to take off the possibility of a military intervention off the table?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I remain extremely hopeful that that is the only solution to the unfolding event in Niger. And the reason is very obvious. In terms of cultural affinity, we are almost one across the West African region, whether it is across Nigeria border, Togo, Benin border, Nigeria, Benin border. It is the same set of people that you find on both sides of the borders. So if ECOWAS decide to go against Niger, for instance, now, for me, my humble assessment of it is that it is just brothers going against brothers. It's going to be a fratricidal war. It's going to be a civil war, so to put it mildly, because it is the same people that you find on both sides of the border. And I don't think this is the strategic objective of the funding of ECOWAS, that one day we will raise guns against each other in the region. So I remain extremely optimistic that what we are seeing on the part of the junta is a mere military propaganda and from some form of rhetoric, possibly to get some form of soft landing, really, because going to war, irrespective of the assessment on the paper, like the chart that you showed, we can only predict the beginning. Nobody can tell how it's going to end. And that ECOWAS probably decide to walk away and take the path of diplomacy must not also be taken for granted. That you are walking away from a fight doesn't mean that you are weak. In fact, I think it's a show of strength of our common humanity, It's a show of strength of what binds us together in terms of our common destiny. So I think these are some of the things that we really need to look into when we consider the possibility of military intervention in Niger. So like you asked me, I remain optimistic 100% that this state is going to be solved on the diplomatic table.
Alex, before I come to Ambassador again, knowing what has happened elsewhere in the SAP region, Mali, Burkina Faso, and I mentioned what I choose to call this Junta alliance that it appears to be building. They've seen what the playbook, they're taking from the playbook of Burkina Faso, taking from the playbook of Mali. ECOWAS adopted similar tough stance there. We haven't seen them, at least in those two countries, that diplomacy had worked to get them back to civilian rule. Should we be realistically optimistic about this? I know there's some optimism there, but looking at what is happening elsewhere, should we be realistic, optimistic that this will actually yield a result different from Mali and Burkina Faso?
Good question. The way I look at it is the big difference is that the chair of ECOWAS is somebody called Bola Tinubu, the president of Nigeria. And the reality is that he's allergic to putschists. I mean, he's been detained, incarcerated by military dictatorship. And he does see this as an existential threat for the whole ECOWAS region. And so I think that's the thing that the Niger junta had underestimated. And you can't ignore the big brother of West Africa, Nigeria, with a determined head of state who has got the Senate now also to align with that if he does need to seek permission for military intervention, he will probably get it. I am still optimistic that there will be an off-ramp, that we don't need to see an intervention. But it's really important that ECOWAS isn't seen to be toothless, that it is seen to have a spine and have teeth like it had 15 years ago. And I think that's where we are at the moment. But I do agree with your previous speaker that diplomacy's got the best chance of success, particularly if the junta realizes that it's the least worst option for them to find an off-ramp and some sort of compromise, which is why I'm very hopeful that those sorts of conversations take place in Niamey tomorrow, led by Ambassador Moussa and the AU and the UN.
Ambassador, that same question. You are at the helm there. Tomorrow, I'm pretty sure your voice will be very clear when the meeting and the negotiations continue. Do you believe, and as Alexa says, that it's important to show that you have teeth, you have bite? Have you shown enough of that in Mali and Burkina Faso to signal to Niger that you are better off taking the negotiated political settlement than a military one?
No, thank you. And I just want to side with what Alex has just said now about where we are. The Tinubu factor is something we should not ignore. Mm-hmm. And the fact that ECOWAS has a new administration right now. Over the last 3 years or so, 7 coups have occurred in our sub-region, right? And then Tinubu comes in, and then he says, no more. ECOWAS also very determined, saying, no more. We are drawing a line in the sand. This should be stopped in its track. This is the litmus test that we have today. So when you ask me about we've not been able to get Mali, Burkina Faso, and Guinea, to return to constitutional order, I would say that it is not entirely correct. We, through pressure, through sanctions, and then through diplomacy, have gotten all the 3 countries to agree that they are going to fulfill their transition timetables, which all must end in 2024, next year. Mali is supposed to end, the transition is supposed to end by February, March. We are supposed to get Burkina Faso by July next year, and Guinea by December next year. So Niger is the litmus test. If we fail in Niger, then it is going to be very difficult to get them to stick to the transition timetables in these countries. So we have to show our teeth that we can back and we can also bite. And this is where ECOWAS is right now. So they have thrown the gauntlet, to ECOWAS and the new chair, and we've taken it up. And we are saying that no option is off the table. So if they realize that the best option is the peace option, fair enough. And I will tell you that I see the title of our conversation this evening is Democracy in Crisis.
Yeah.
I will not call it a democracy being in crisis per se, because if you look at Afrobarometer analysis, their polls and other things, almost the vast majority of Africans, West Africans, see democracy as the least, what is it,
It's still the most attractive option for most people on the sub-region.
He's talking about satisfaction with democracy.
Yes. It's still the option for most people.
Yeah, so I am talking about the crisis of governance, okay, in the region. I think that has been a real factor driving what is happening now, not democracy per se. And the fact that the asymmetric conflict environment with terrorism as the defining factor have also added an ingredient into it. If you look at where coups have occurred, majority of them are places infested with terrorists. Also. So it's no coincidence that this is happening. And as Olewole was saying, that look, we want the peaceful option. We want the peaceful option. But the thing is that we must be ready to go to war. And that if you take the whole of Africa, the whole of West Africa, we are all brothers and sisters. Whether it is going to be war or not, we have to go and stop wars in Liberia. We stopped wars in Sierra Leone. We threatened to use force in the Gambia in 2016. And so on and so forth in Guinea-Bissau and all that. So if our brothers and sisters in Niger see that the best option for them is actually to agree, like Alex was saying, to a restoration of constitutional order in the country. That is the best for all. But we will never allow them to continue with this military coup contagion, in the region, just on the basis that it is going to be a fratricidal war. Because, we are not going to be apologists for people who upturn what are our protocols. And the key protocol of ECOWAS is the supplementary protocol on democracy and good governance. All member states have signed up to it. And in fact, the protocol came into effect under the chairmanship of a president from Chad, that is President Tanja, somewhere in 2004, 2005, even though the protocol was adopted in 2001. It came into force under his chairmanship of ECOWAS. So if you have agreed to that, the chapter, what is it? We declare this supplementary protocol actually declares zero tolerance for power obtained or maintained by unconstitutional means. And if you have signed up to it, it is a peace and security document. Yeah. And if you sign up to it, it means you have ceded part of your sovereignty, to the collective good.
In other words, that is what you plan to enforce. Oluwale, very quickly before I take a quick break, let me ask you this. I mean, Ambassador just declared that we must be ready, ECOWAS, to use force. What's your assessment? Is ECOWAS ready, if it comes to it, to use force in Niger?
Thank you so much once again. I believe strongly that the ambassador is speaking from the vintage position because he surely knows a lot than I know as far as this is concerned. But just permit a bit of my textbook knowledge of what we can draw as comparison to this. The United States government spent more than $2 trillion in Afghanistan to build democracy. Today, the same US government is negotiating with Taliban. I have people who told me that in 2 weeks, Ukraine is going to be down to zero. Kyiv is going to fall, everything. I think that is the greatest challenge that Putin is saving his face from now, and that is contending with, because a lot of factors can be thrown into the mix. On paper, anybody will tell you that Niger is nothing to, I've said it on different platforms that if we decide to go in the direction of war, we shouldn't be bringing Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali to contention in terms of potential resistance that they can mount against ECOWAS. But the point is, going to war at what cost? More than 1 million Nigerians have been displaced into Niger. And these same people were displaced by terrorism, by banditry in the northwest and the northeast. If we start throwing missiles, bombs, where are those people going to be relocated to? What is the potential humanitarian consequence of a war on health, on social development, on education, and what have you? So I think when you look at all these things together, and I also, as an ECOWAS citizen, I think the stunts, if I could use that word, that the Burkina Faso and Mali are doing, it's just out of place. Because these guys have no solutions to the problems of those countries. They just want to be protected regimes. In terms of security of life and property, they have failed based on every available indicator. According to Helm Conflict Event Location Database, violent attack has been on the rise in Mali, has been on the rise in Burkina Faso. So the example or the factors, the explanation that the junta are giving in Niger that security has fallen is a complete lie. In fact, it has been better managed under Bazoum. Attacks have been reduced. Governance indicator is on the upward curve. So when you look at all this together, you think you come to a conclusion that there is no need for war. We just need to find a political solution to this. Because, like I said, we can only predict the beginning of the war. It is going to have potential consequence. And when you look at the vagaries of governance deficit that the ambassador raised in his earlier intervention, I don't think adding a new layer of the consequence of war is not something that anybody wants to entertain in this sub-region now. And like I said, I will continue to say, if ECOWAS decide to walk away from a fight, it shouldn't be mistaken for weakness. I think rather it's a symbol of strength being demonstrated in terms of our collective humanity. I'm not in any way underestimating what ECOWAS can be in terms of the military capability. I'm rather looking at the potential consequence and say, oh, come, let us be very, very strategic in going about these things, paying attention to the details so that the overarching consequence will not be borne by the poor people that we actually want to protect by saying we want to restore democracy in the country.
Thank you, gentlemen. Please stay with me, gentlemen. I'm going to take a quick break. When I return, I'm going to open up the conversation. Ambassador just talks about the fact that it's not democracy in crisis, but it's governance that is in crisis. But many will challenge that and say, what about the democratic dividends that they aren't getting, which is really what is fueling what we are having in the sub-region? And then there is the Russian factor, the Wagner element. And many have said that Africa, maybe West Africa in particular, is becoming the staging post, a proxy staging post for this ongoing geopolitical tussle between the West and Russia over Ukraine. Is that what we are seeing in West Africa? But what really is the impact on what is happening in the Sahel, on my life and yours in the sub-region? Stay with us. After that, my guests will weigh in on that. It's live on PM Express. My guest, Ambassador Dr. Abdul Fattah Musa, is a Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security at ECOWAS. Dr. Alex Vines is a Research Director at the Africa Program Chatham House. Oluwole Ojawele is a Regional Organized Crime Observatory Director at the Institute for Security Studies. And remember, PM Express is always brought to you by Syntex Tank. No matter your water needs, Syntex Tank has it all. And Syntex Tank is first to introduce to you a double-layer tank, and now you can have as many layers as you want. Syntex Tank is first to introduce white inner layer tanks in Ghana. We now introduce to you the customer specs order, which lets you order any color and size of preference. Syntex tanks gives you the longest warranty of 7 years, which no other tank gives you in Ghana. So whatever your water consumption, size of project or demand, choose Syntex tank. We have agents nationwide. Call them on 0244 335 168 or shop online at syntexgh.com. Syntex tanks are strong, are tough. Now, Cherry Tree Properties desires our wishes. Beauty is a promise of happiness, but passion is everything. Now, thinking about buying a new home, talk to those who build with passion. Sloane Square is a new gated community development at Sakumono, developed by Cherry Tree Properties, a one-of-a-kind, well-planned luxury you've never experienced. Contact them on 0553 0553 662 366. Cherry Tree Properties, sophistication and class. I want to now return to my panelists who've been with me as we analyze what is happening in Niger, but the wider implication for the SAP region. And I want to come back to you, Alex Vines. And just before the break, the Ambassador Abdel Fattah Musa started this leg of the conversation when he was categorical that it is not democracy that is in crisis, or as has been said, democracy that is in recession, it is governance that is in recession. But can you make a separation between the two? Because many will look at this and say there is a democratic dividend that citizens simply aren't getting. And that explains why when the governance breaks down and is not delivering that democratic dividends, people cheer on the overthrow of democracy in Niger, as you've seen, in Burkina Faso and in Mali.
I think that's really right. I mean, my experience of the coups in Burkina Faso and in Mali are that they did have popular support. And the problem is that regular politics wasn't delivering. There was growing inequality. In fact, the state was seen as predatory in a sense. And a lot of money and resources were being put into military, including by Western partners, to counter the terrorism that you've talked about. And the danger was that you were then getting fragile states, because I think we agreed that they are fragile countries, but they were becoming brittle ones, because the only institution that was increasingly seen to be at all credible was the military. And so civilian population started to think that maybe it's the military that could have the solution. There's a very good UNDP report launched a few weeks ago on the fringes of the AU meeting in Nairobi that interviews over 8,000 people in coup-prone countries. So they interviewed in Mali and in Burkina Faso, for example, and in Guinea. And what they find is that there was definitely popularity of the coups, but that there was buyer's remorse. As Ajawale was saying, the military men do not come up with developmental solutions. They do not create stronger states. So the end goal, in fact, is that people were hoping that coups would bring about, in the end, more accountable government. And actually, as Ambassador Musa was saying, democracy. But we're not finding that through the juntas. And that's the conundrum, I think, that we're facing. So democracy is under duress. I'd agree with that. But it's not in complete crisis, because the end goal across West Africa is actually more accountable government that brings and provides social goods and provides accountability and provides economic growth. And that's the challenge, I think, for politics anywhere in the world, and particularly in the ECOWAS states at the moment.
Oluwole, isn't that the big picture, though? I mean, whilst ECOWAS is determined to show that it can bite, shouldn't ECOWAS be also adopting a preventive approach? In other words, looking at working with peer review mechanisms to get leaders to be more responsive to the population's needs and also encourage the direct benefits from this democratic dividends. And that is really where the focus should be, is it not?
Thank you so much. I think what we also need to underscore here is the fact that democracy is not working, even if people claim it's not working. should never be used in any way as a pretense for people to come through into political power through the gun. The reason is simple. The military is a body of a small professional in a country. So the journalists cannot just gang up together and they say they want to overthrow power. The medical doctors, the teachers association cannot come together to say they want to overthrow power. Everybody is a professional in their own respective niche. So we need to respect that borderline, that the military as an institution, by mandate, is not created to provide political leadership. Let us settle that once and for all. And the second thing is that in some of these countries that you've mentioned, whether it is in Burkina Faso, Mali, or Niger, there is no concerted effort on the part of the elite to consolidate democracy over the years. That is the reason why you continue to see this fragmentation and military incursion into politics. The political elite, the governing elite, the educated elite in the country, they need to come to a realization and a conclusion that the only route to political power is through the ballot, except to have an alternative, maybe monarchical system or whatever. But within African context, the only platform that we have is democracy. We have to settle that. I'm going to give you an example of Nigeria. In the recent election, the former chief of army staff, after his retirement, he contested the election in Bauchi State and he lost the election. Most of those former military staff, they are now back in politics. Everybody needs to realize that the only route to political power is through the ballot system. That is the first thing we need to settle. Whether democracy is delivering dividends or not, we want democracy to deliver dividends. But Mali, Burkina Faso, they are in a state of chaos now. So let these people not promise what they cannot give, and let the people not be deceived. That is the overarching argument that the people need to realize and actually own democracy. It is an insult. And I believe those people that are pro-coup protesters that we have seen on the street are actually bought over to be able to be doing that. What you saw on the first day in Niamey are pro-Bazoum, pro-democracy protesters. Now they have probably clamped down on them, and then you see people waving the flag of Russia and all these things on the street. That is not the true people. The true people are in the rural areas. The true people who want democracy in that country, they are not on the streets now protesting in support of the coup. Because what you are going to see in the coming days, as the sanction is biting harder, is that these people will only be preoccupied with regime protection and they will never deliver on governance. We have moved past that some years ago in West Africa, and we should not allow them to come back, to roll back those dark days into our present contemporary experiences. Whether democracy is delivering dividends or not is not the big question here. But we need to settle that the only route to power is for people to go through the ballots.
But what about when the people find that they are not indeed, the avenues to express dissent is not there, plus their economic circumstances is deteriorating? You're definitely creating a toxic mix for somebody to come proving or claiming to be their savior, to walking in and they're cheered on. I mean, aren't we making an excuse for African leaders to hide behind, well, democracy is the only means to proper governance, and yet end up not delivering the governance?
I agree with you perfectly. And I think that is the reason why democracy has provided a leeway of 4 years, 5 years in some of these places to be able for people to change a government that they don't want. And let me also quickly say that what we have seen in most of these places is that attention in terms of gauging democratic dividends is centered at the central government. There are other possible avenues through which people can make entry to deliver dividends of democracy at the subnational level. But I understand the angle in which you are coming from. And the reason is simple. The African head of state, the sub-regional head of state, when they actually meet, they meet as trade unionists. They don't talk through to one another, possibly because of the rule of non-intervention in other state affairs, sovereign power of every country to determine how they want to govern themselves and all those things. Of course, we are still trying to find a way to look for solution into that. But I'm still going to come back to anchor on this. We're not making an excuse for any of those leaders, because even the authoritarian tendencies of some of them who claim to be defending democracy in Niger now is in question. I take that, I agree with you perfectly. But we need to come to a point of realization that coming through the other system, like the coup or any form of government, you have tasted it. I've tasted it. The senior ambassador here has tasted it. It is a dark days. We shouldn't even bother to contemplate it at all.
Yeah.
If you allow Niger to go in this direction, the sanction will bite so hard that they won't even get food to eat. And it is at that point that they will realize that they need to embrace.
Let me bring Ambassador Abdul Fattah. Ambassador Abdul Fattah, that question I'm pretty sure has been asked of you. That yes, ECOWAS is projecting a very tough stance on Niger. But what are you doing about the rest of the SAB region where leaders aren't ensuring that democracy is actually benefiting the overwhelming majority of people? If you go to Niger, for example, 2 out of 5 live in extreme poverty. They live on less than $2.15 a day. Isn't that the reason why we are having democracy in recession in the SAB? And isn't why ECOWAS should be focusing more of its energies? Ambassador, please unmute for me. I think I may have lost your audio. Sorry, I can't seem to hear the ambassador. Let's see if we could. My technical team says that the actual audio is on also. But this is important. I need to hear his thoughts on this because he's a man who will be going into the meeting on Thursday. I wonder if this will come up at the conversation on Thursday because of how important it is to also adopt a preventive approach to the coups in the SAB region. Not only wait for it to happen when the signs are there. If you go to Niger, it's reported that, in 2022, there were protests by civil society groups that were significantly shut down by the administration, and many of them now are finding their voices. Do we have the audio back of the ambassador? Ambassador, please, let's see if we can hear you. Unfortunately, we're not able to hear him. Let's see if we could get him to reconnect and see if we can hear him, because that is absolutely key. But whilst we wait for an ambassador to come in, I need to bring in a very important subject also about the Russian element in this. And Alex, I want to bring you in on this part of this, because we've seen in Niger, we've seen in Mali, and we've seen in Burkina Faso that the Wagner Group in Russia is becoming the option for the coup leaders. And we've seen actually in Niger that the protesters on the streets jubilating, cheering on the junta, some of them are wearing Russian flags. What's happening here? Is West Africa becoming a staging post, in a proxy staging post for this geopolitical tussle between the West and Russia over Ukraine?
So definitely in Niger, we've been seeing the crowds in Niamey carrying some pro-Russian placards and flags. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's a groundswell of support for Russia in Niger. It's very easy to distribute a few flags and kind of stoke up things. Having said that, it's clear that Russia is very successful through trolling and fake news and a variety of other kind of activities in seeding doubt and spreading disarray. The Wagner and its troll factories have been very effective, and they've even been stationed, even in Ghana, in Accra. There were a number of Russian troll factories that have had to be closed down. So that is an issue. How successful Wagner is in West Africa is still debatable. They are very present in Libya. They are very active in Mali.
Yeah, hello.
Sorry,
Alex, please proceed. I may have had the audio back from Ambassador. Please proceed.
Nana Akufo-Addo of Ghana early this year made a very strong warning to the Burkina junta not to consider Wagner. That seems to have worked until just recently. It's very notable that Captain Traoré, the junta leader of Burkina, was lauded at the second Russia-Africa summit in St. Petersburg, and in that summit made some very positive statements about Mr. Putin and Russia. And so I'm wondering if we're now seeing a tilt of that junta closer to Russia. it's not clear to me with the Niger coup that there's a lot of Russian fingerprints over it. My view is that it's very much tied to domestic politics, but it is internationalizing. And this is where the ambassador, but also Ojewale, is absolutely right. This is the danger, is that as this thing progresses, it becomes more vulnerable to geopolitics, which is why there's an urgency to find a solution to this thing sooner rather than later. At the moment, the good news is that the West is fully behind ECOWAS and will take its lead from ECOWAS. That's certainly what I'm hearing both from Washington, from Paris. London isn't particularly influential in Niger, but that is the position that we're seeing through the European Union and Europe. And the concern and focus is obviously about this crisis in Niger doesn't internationalize further.
Yeah.
So we have a narrow opportunity for ECOWAS really to define the security future of West Africa. This is an important moment where I think sometimes international partners that have been mischievous and inconsistent have run out of ideas and are looking for vision from ECOWAS. So this is an African agency moment.
Yeah.
And I'm excited, but I hope it won't get squandered.
Yeah, and that's a very important point. And I have just a minute, but I want to bring in Ambassador Abdel Fattah into the conversation now. Ambassador, I wanted you to address for me how much attention is ECOWAS paying to the need to also be preventative in the approach and getting leaders to also make sure that their governance delivers the dividends that will get people to actually reject coups when they happen and make it unattractive. Very briefly, if you may.
Yeah. No, look, let me tell you, ECOWAS, when it comes to the conflict arena, that captures the news headlines. ECOWAS does a lot of structural preventive work as far as the region is concerned, and it is endowed with a lot of documents like that, the Community Development Program, the ECOWAS Conflict Prevention Framework, which are all being operationalized. And the focus is actually on institution building, in the region, because it is actually weak institutions that have been the source of all these problems, whether it is civil society, whether it's parliament, whether it's the judiciary. And the judiciary is the number one culprit when it comes to democratic governance in our country, because they are the instruments used to fiddle with constitutions. They are usually the instruments being used to marginalize opponents and others. And we have to get these institutions to actually be Republican, to actually respond to the needs of the people. And this is what ECOWAS is doing, but it doesn't capture the headline. That is the regional integration program of ECOWAS, which was the raison d'etre of the creation of ECOWAS in the first place.
Yeah.
It is the insecurity that allowed us to go. And then just to, conclude, if I may, the fact that if you look at it, all the coups that have occurred in the region, the number one reason they are given is insecurity. The civilians are not able to, deal with insecurity, but empirical evidence shows that it was a lot better even under the civilians. And Burkina Faso is a clear example.
Of that.
When Abore was in power, for example, there were just 700,000 IDPs, internally displaced people, and under 40% of the territory was under terrorist occupation.
Yeah, I mean, those are very interesting statistics. Unfortunately, my time is up now. And gentlemen, thank you very much for agreeing to speak to me. We've learned a lot, and we look forward to Thursday. Hopefully, we get a clearer picture going forward from ECOWAS. I'm grateful, Ambassador Dr. Abdel Fattah Musa and Dr. Alex Vines and Oluwole Ojewale, who joined me with their thoughts on what is happening in the SAP region on the back of Niger. Enjoy the rest of the evening.